Morning, welcome to this WECA Overview and Scrutiny Committee meeting. So this meeting is broadcast on the WECA YouTube channel. Can I remind members and officers that if they're not actually speaking, they should be muted, if that's okay. Apologies for absence, Ian. What apologies for absence have we got?
We have two apologies today, Chair. Councillor James Arrowsmith from South Gloucestershire Council and Councillor Peter Crew from North Somerset Council.
Ian, I've got people in the waiting room, but presumably you're dealing with those, are you?
Yeah, the people in the waiting room, Chair, are people waiting to make public forum statements. So in the usual way, we'll admit them to the meeting at the point where they're going to make their statement.
Thank you very much. Declarations of interest. Has anybody on the committee got any declarations of interest on today's matters? No, thank you. Noted. Minutes of previous meetings. The minutes have gone around. Did anybody have any comments on those minutes? No, thank you. The public items. So I've got a number of statements and a question. I've got Dave Redgewell is first up on my list. Is he in the waiting room, Ian?
Yes, David Redgewell is here, so we'll admit him to the meeting now, Chair.
Thank you very much.
Should be just joining now.
Hi, David. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Welcome to this meeting. You've got 3 minutes to make.
Thank you. Well, the first thing I'd like to say is obviously the most important thing as far as the transport groups are concerned is to get North Somerset into WECA. And that should be a top priority in view of regional governance. There's no doubt about it that government likes dealing with city regions, it likes to deal with combined authorities. And to make this work, we need North Somerset to join. And I fear that if we continue the way we're going on without getting the Secretary of State and local engaged in this, we'll end up, if we're not careful, with less money for the next 4 years on vital public transport projects. We also haven't got an ITA if we don't bring in North Somerset, and simply need to make sure all the rail officers work in one unit like they do in Manchester or the West Midlands, and we bring all the public transport officers into one team. Now, we're miles from that, and this should be the top priority of this authority. It's an authority, not a money bank for Bristol, South Gloucestershire or Baines, to actually run public services. Peter Mann does a reasonably good job with the small team he's got keeping public transport on the road, but we need to sort that issue out. And I hope there's discussions going on with Secretary of State at this present time, and the amendment by Vari Thelthall is carried through. And I know there's now going to be a scrutiny commission in Bristol, and I welcome that. It needs to work fast. And if necessary, we need to delay the election to allow a second deal to be done with government. On the general domestic issues, on rail, I'm very pleased that we're now getting some movement on the Severn Beach Line Westbury routes. I'm still concerned we have no public inquiry for the yet scheduled for the Forest Headline by the Secretary of State, and that needs to be pushed because obviously that's not progressing at the moment. We still don't have a spade in the ground or a bulldozer in the ground at Portway Park and Ride, which I think should be a top priority to make sure happens. And of course, the Henbury Loop and Charfield Station never appeared in the government's infrastructure plan, which I read with great interest because they were just simply not there. So I'm disappointed by that, and hopefully we'll get them back in with some pushing and shoving. But again, we've got to work with government and not oppose government, which is what we seem to be doing at the moment. On buses, then obviously I'm very pleased that Peter Mann's done a really good job there, but there's 3 issues that concern me at the moment. One is the lack of a 37 bus between Bristol and Bath, 4 journeys a day. And over Christmas, that bus is being withdrawn for nearly 10 days. So there is no Bristol Bath via Bitton and Longwell Green service whatsoever. I do think that needs taking up. And also, if you rely on getting from Keynsham to the Cadbury Heath and to the shops and out to North Common and Wormley, you've got no service on the 18 either. So these issues should be resolved with First Group to make sure we have adequate provision of local buses. Also, we still have a problem, Chair, on the D2 between Bath and Frome, which does not serve the village of Road, and we're expecting school children to work 2 miles in the dark back to the village. Somerset County Council offered some money for that route. I would urgently ask WECA and Somerset County Council to have a meeting to resolve the D2 issues as soon as possible with first pass. On safety, I raised.
Through to wrap up, please.
Okay, yeah, I'm going to finish now. Thank you, Stephen. Just to say that on safety, can we please make sure that HCT buses of Bristol, which is part of a London company, fit safety screens for their buses going to and from hospital? It's not acceptable to have drivers exposed to risk of COVID virus in Southmead Hospital, or South Bristol Hospital, or Dursey Hospital. Thank you very much.
Thank you, David. So next I've got Lucy. Travis, is Lucy in the waiting room?
No, she's not, Chair. So, but Kim Hicks, statement number 3,
Okay.
is here. So we'll admit Kim Hicks to the meeting now. Just joining.
Hello, Kim. Can you hear me? Hello, Kim.
I think she's just connecting, Chair.
Okay. Should we perhaps come back to Kim? Oh, no, hang on. Kim, can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Oh, hi, Kim. Welcome to this meeting. You've got 3 minutes to make your statement.
Thank you very much. We're all going through very strange times at the moment. Many of us have had to adapt the way we do things. Sometimes there are unpredicted and negative consequences to our actions. 1 second. Sorry, phone call.
That's okay, Kim. That's okay. You carry on.
We are currently running, WECA are currently running a planning for the future survey during a time when residents have been under full lockdown and now under tier 2 and tier 3 restrictions. It appears that thousands and thousands of people in the Weka area will not now have a chance to contribute to the planning for the future survey. This is because they are not online and do not communicate digitally. Even those who have a basic online presence often need help and support to engage with the surveys. The help and support is not possible during a lockdown or in tiered restrictions. It appears that no one is looking after the interests of the thousands and thousands of non-digital residents in the Weka area. I urge the Overview and Scrutiny Committee to ensure that Weka give residents who do not have online access to be made aware of the survey. Offering to send out hard copies online does not work if you are not online in the first place. The views from the residents are so very important to feed into the SDS, a plan that will impact on where we live, work and play for years to come. It is morally wrong to be excluded because you are non-digital and not even aware of the survey. Not being online should not be a disadvantage. Please suggest to Weka to delay the survey until all the residents can be made aware of and can actively engage with it. If not, the SDS may fail in the same way as the JSP did. Without ensuring that Weka engage with non-digital residents, the SDS will not be robust, consistent and objective. Please consider this urgently. Thank you and take care.
Thank you, Kim. Ian, that's something you might just make a note about for discussion on Friday. I mean, it's a fair point during COVID that it's more difficult to people to respond to a consultation, but we can talk about that later. But anyway, thank you, Kim, very much.
Chair, if I may, you may wish to bring David Carter in to comment at this point, just on that particular point.
Okay, David, would you like to comment?
Hi there. Yeah. So we understand entirely the sentiment behind this, and I think if it were a statutory consultation on the draft, I think they clearly additional measures other than the digital that we're taking. We'd understand that. However, there's a couple of reasons. A, the timescales for the SDS, which feed into the local plans, necessitate going to engagement now. So engagement is not a statutory requirement. It's a voluntary thing that we think is necessary to do. But equally, the other thing is that the government has been clear that it wants to see planning processes continue during COVID-19. You've seen with the lockdown and then unlocking that if you wait until a point where unlocking and that, if you like, that congregation to have the events that we normally have. So I think we're in a bit of a rock and a hard place, and the sense at the moment is that as it isn't a statutory consultation, and that will happen later in the year as part of the prescribed legal process, that what we're doing is sufficient at the moment. But we do understand sentiments that not everybody is online. But as I say, as it's not a statutory consultation, we feel that what we're doing at the moment is appropriate. And again, people like the speaker can certainly relay it, and we hope the community groups do relay it round to people, knock on doors if that's appropriate, to make sure people feel engaged. And of course, we're making every effort to ensure that people get the by post, get the consultation documents to them. So I think the more people by word of mouth and persuasion can get that address and write to us, and we will give them the information. That's, I think, all I want to say on it, Chair. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. That's helpful. Would you be prepared to write to Kim Hicks to sort of expand on just to tell her the issues you've just told us?
Yes, more than happy to. Yes.
I mean, if you'd sooner, you can give me the information and I can write to her. But either way,
yes, we'll do that, Chair. We've got a statement that we can give you to respond.
Thank you very much. So next is Gavin Smith. Is it Gavin or Martin Garrett?
Neither Gavin nor Martin are with us at the moment, Chair. So I suggest we move on to Councillor Clive Stevens, who is here.
Okay. Yeah, thank you.
I'm just admitting him to the meeting now, Chair.
Hi, Clive. Can you hear me?
He's just connecting.
Hi, Clive. Can you hear me?
Hi. It's just computer's sort of a bit slow this morning. It's a bit cold, I think. Sorry about that.
Welcome. You've got 3 minutes to make your statement, please.
Thank you. Well, the good news is I don't need 3 minutes. So to solve the crises in homelessness, congestion, traffic congestion, air pollution, carbon dioxide, WECA is the only game in town. We need strong joint working to build more affordable houses and to put in more sustainable transport. But WECA lacks many of the democratic checks and balances that are needed to fit into its role as a democratic solution to these. Why don't you consider things like a full council of WECA, incorporating some local authority councillors, holding the Metro Mayor to task? Maybe you have call-in decisions, I don't know, but there's so much more scrutiny, task and finishes, and joint working on policy development. It's going to be really difficult to get affordable homes for Bristol, for people working in Bristol, out in the shires. We need to admit that and work a joint solution, and then cheap transport for them. So I'm looking for more democracy, and you rarely see leaders themselves driving more openness, scrutiny and accountability. Understandably so, as it puts them under more pressure. But as WECA's Oversight and Scrutiny Commission, I believe you are uniquely placed to do this. Another reason is I have never seen a report entitled Improving Democracy come into the WECA. And I ask, is it on the forward plan? So perhaps as a scrutiny body, you might suggest the following: asking that WECA officers commission a study on democratic accountability, maybe just looking at the other combined authorities around the country, and then once that's done, it goes out to constitution, WECA, a consultation WECA-wide, which you could then involve in a review, citizens' assembly, or a commission to receive input and make specific recommendations to the WECA leadership.
Can I ask you to wrap up, Clive?
Yeah. I'm wrapping up now by wishing you to stay well and have a very good break. Thank you very much. You've deserved it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Tony Lloyd?
Actually, Chair, while Councillor Stevens was on, Gavin Smith has arrived in the waiting room, so I suggest we take Gavin Smith next.
Okay, that'd be great.
So he's just joining now.
Thank you. Hello, Gavin, can you hear me?
Yes, thank you very much.
Welcome to this
Sorry,
meeting.
trouble signing in.
That's okay. Welcome to this meeting. You've got 3 minutes to make your statement.
Oh, blimey, thank you. Okay. You've been sent Martin Garrett's paper on an integrated transport authority. All I want to do is just add a tiny bit to that, just from personal experience, really. I was a transport planner for about 30 years up and down the country, urban and rural authorities, the last 10 in Bristol. And Bristol's a different sort of place. I think we have a lot of congestion, we have a lot of air pollution. What we don't have is a rapid transit system, which comparable cities like Birmingham, Sheffield, soon Cardiff, etc. will. And that's why we got a lot of traffic, and that's why we got a lot of pollution. And we won't actually get one if we want to be comparable to these other cities, unless we become an ITA. Nottingham has achieved one without being an integrated transport authority, but it's had many years of cooperative behaviour between the county and the city, which we haven't had. I mean, I think the Avon area, I say Avon deliberately, is the only metropolitan area which is voted to cease to exist. I think it's the only area. It's also the only area without a rapid transit system. Leeds at least has its metro. The two things are related. And we don't quite know how to encourage the Avon area to become an integrated transport unit, a transport authority. But until we do, we won't have a rapid transit system because it requires joint planning. We'll get Metro West in bitty pieces, but that's not equivalent to a rapid transit system. So I live in Bristol. There's traffic coming down Ashley Hill. There's traffic in North Bristol. St John's Lane, about half of it, I guess, is probably from outside the city. We're not going to be able to do anything about that. We're not going to do anything about our air pollution unless we tackle this as a joint enterprise between the suburban, the outer city, the satellite towns, and the central city. We can't do that without being an integrated transport authority. And all we can do is hope that people on the councils realise that eventually, and then we'll start getting the government investment. That's really what, that's our point. Thank you.
Okay, Chair, are you happy for me to proceed and allow?
Sorry, I was talking on mute. Yeah, is Tony Lloyd with us?
So Tony Lloyd is with us, so I'll admit him to the meeting now, Chair.
Sorry. Hello, Tony, can you hear us?
I think it's just connecting, Chair.
Hello, Tony, can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
I can indeed. Welcome to the meeting. You've got 3 minutes to make your statement.
Yes, thank you. Good morning. My name is Tony Lloyd. I'm from. Hello.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Hear?
Yeah.
I represent Friends of Suburban Bristol Railways. I thank you for the opportunity to address you today and I'm going to talk about the rail delivery plan and the strategic rail investment. Sorry, I've got a machine on that I'm trying to turn off. Just bear with me a minute.
That's okay. You're
Right, it's gone. It's gone. I'm okay.
Okay.
Yeah, I thank you for the opportunity to address you today. Yes, I thank you for the opportunity to address you today on the subject of the 10-year rail delivery plan. Firstly, I'd like to say Fosborough warmly welcomes the investment in rail that is planned and outlined in the 10-year delivery plan. We, of course, have various questions and comments, as you would expect, but the fact that there is a plan for rail in this region has got to be good news. Of course, this is just a component of the transport mix needed in the area, but homing in on rail component does concentrate minds on the need for investment to counter years of neglect and also to open up new possibilities. I note that the rail plan is a joint Network Rail Weka initiative, and that is good that Network Rail is on board with this. Transport groups such as Fosborough have long been moaning about too much support being given to road building to the detriment of rail. This is partly because cars were the in thing some time ago, but this is changing now. And with the resulting congestion, environmental effects is being challenged. And for the most part, government and planning and transport authorities are taking this message on board. However, there's still a problem that it's much more difficult to get rail, as well as trams and other light rail schemes up and running. As you well know, this is because of the multitude of departments and authorities that are involved in improving funds, but also the complexity of scheme approval. A single out Network Rail's GRIP process for the approval of rail projects. I think perhaps the word stranglehold rather than GRIP would be useful. I'm very happy that in fact Network Rail has said they're going to phase out GRIP and bring in something called PACE, which should be a more hopefully sensible protocol, which will speed up projects and reduce costs. Coming to the strategic rail investment itself, there are some comments in the written statement, so which I won't bother to highlight again, to talk about again, but I'd like to highlight the following. Firstly, Metro West Phase 2, the Henbury Spur line. We could not see any indication of when this will be delivered. There didn't seem to be any dates or delivery periods for this, and we're concerned that delivery is being delayed until there is a huge amount of development already there, so the passenger numbers are likely to be high and revenues are likely to be high. We suggest that that is not the way to go forward, that the service should start at the outset of the development of Filton Airfield in order that people can set up using public transport rather than cars. If we get
Tony, can I ask you to start wrapping up, please?
Yep, if we get to the cars, it's very difficult to change their habits once again. Ashley Down station, we're very pleased that this is happening. We would suggest that more services could call at the station. It could be a half hour or even more frequent service. In conclusion, I reiterate the rail plan is to be welcomed, and I hope that these plans will come to fruition. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Is that all the public forum, Ian?
Yes, that's the end of the public forum, Chair. Yes.
Thank you very much. So next item is Chair's business. Well, the only bit of Chair's business I've got really is the discussion we had about this this letter that we sent to the leaders concerning North Somerset joining us in Weka. As you all know, we drafted a letter. I sent it off on, I think it was the 20th of November. Unfortunately, I've had no response, which apart from anything else is a bit rude. Now, I emailed it. Perhaps that was a mistake. I'm not sure. Maybe I should have sent hard copies. But anyway, I emailed it to the addresses. I propose to email again today after this meeting to say, was the letter received? Do you have any comment? And I propose to mention that at the meeting on Friday when I'm giving my report. I mean, as it was a joint letter, I'm happy to take comments from anybody about anything else they think I should be doing at this stage. Yes, Jeff.
Steve, I was going to suggest, rather than just raising it, can I suggest that it's submitted as a report from Scrutiny to the meeting on Friday, and that you speak to it at that point? It just seems to me that we need to highlight it, because to have not even had a reply from anybody just seems remarkable. And I think that will be a way of ensuring that it goes in the public domain and shows that Scrutiny has raised the issue and is concerned about it in a way that all can see.
Yeah, thank you, Jeff. I think I will attach it as an appendix to my report on Friday. Yes, Gary.
We need a very detailed history of what's actually happened in this process. Motives are in dispute, but what we must have is the factual position on what the options are and what has actually happened, who did what when, who didn't do anything when they should have done, etc. And surely as a Scrutiny Commission, we're entitled to demand that of WECA and request it certainly of the individual authorities.
Well, I'll come to Hugh in a sec. As part of the pre-meeting for this meeting, we had a discussion with Shazia, where she's agreed to give us an update on what options in terms of meetings and investigations are open to us, and so that's in our mind, so to speak. Hugh?
Brilliant. Yes, just to on the November the 20th, Don Davies just said, thank you very much, very supportive. So one needed reply, but thank you very much. Thank you so much for sending letter. North Somerset do really appreciate it. I've been to pretty much every public forum I can to try and just raise awareness of this. So hopefully sending out the letter on Friday should do some good. I think what's important though is just that we as Scrutiny members, but also all councillors in all four authorities, do get that timeline of what's happened and also what can happen now, because I think so many of us don't know what can happen now. It would be an absolute travesty if North Somerset couldn't join, given that we're right now during the middle of a pandemic, during an employment crisis, and that's the real thing that we could all benefit with if we do join. So thank you very much for your support, and hopefully leaders and officers should be able to do that. And also, obviously, just the point that the leaders should meet. The leaders need to meet with urgency to actually address these challenges, rather than going off and stomping and having our own little, rather than keeping to ourselves. We need to make sure that all leaders continue the discussions and don't just treat this like, well, it's happened now.
Thank you. Yeah, I may have misrepresented Don. Actually, we were talking about other matters, and he did thank me. He had received the letter. I suppose I meant I hadn't had a acknowledgement of receipt from the other recipients, but I rather meant I hadn't had any substantive answer. But Don did thank me. Yeah,
that's all understood. I thought I'd just correct that just to make sure it didn't look like Don didn't acknowledge it.
This is a public meeting, so the press may well be watching this, but a question was raised earlier about whether I should be sending the letter to the press. Is there anybody here who would object to me doing that? Okay, I don't see any. Yes, Winston.
No objection, but I think David Redgewell's statement is a wake-up call for all of us. And I do see us getting to the stage in the near future where we should be demanding that there is actually a postponement of the Metro Mayor election until this matter is resolved.
I would support that.
You're on mute, Stephen.
You're mute.
Sorry, Hal, say again.
I would support that. I think we should. We need to say something very positive, and the idea is that we actually put the election on hold.
Yeah, I'm not sure we can. we can make that statement as part of this meeting. It feels like we haven't really discussed it in enough detail to be able to do that. You can, of course, put in statements to the meeting on Friday. Statements have to be in by noon on Thursday, I think. So Hal, you might want to do that, but I'm not sure. In all honesty, I can add that to my report of this scrutiny meeting because we haven't really discussed it. Yes, Farry.
Yeah, so I just wanted to really support what Gary said earlier about the fact that we really need all the information and actually have that discussion, which would be really useful. Obviously, we need to wait to hear from Shazia about what we can and can't discuss in this forum. But I definitely do support Gary's views on that, and of course what he was saying as well about the urgency. And I think we really need to reiterate that on Friday. The urgency of the leaders and the mayor getting together and having this conversation. Yeah,
I will do. Mike.
Isn't it just putting forward the suggestion that if this cannot be sorted out, then perhaps people should consider postponing the Merrell election rather than making a statement? I just feel that we can't really put that forward as a suggestion of this commission because we don't know all the facts. We don't really know the options, and we haven't really discussed it in enough detail to make such a big recommendation. Others may think different, but that's my take on it. Yes, Gary.
Well, I think we're all agreed that it's essential that North Somerset is involved. That's coming from all sides. And whilst postponing the election is not a good option, if that's the only one we're left with, we'd have to support that. But I did raise this with senior officers in Bristol who made clear that they would not support that. And didn't feel that it could actually happen.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Jeff.
Yeah, I mean, first in your earlier comment, I think I would object if you didn't release your letter to the press, to be honest. I think we should be doing that. I think the issue about deferring the election is something that's too complex for us to be certain that is a solution. But on the other hand, I don't see it as a problem of suggesting that that might be one of the options considered as a way of resolving this, given that there appears to be collective agreement that we don't want this left for 4 years before it's resolved. So I think throwing that in as a possibility would be showing that we are open to all manner of options to deliver what we believe is essential.
So has anybody got any, I'll come to you, Hal, in a sec. Has anybody got any objection to me tacking that on as a possibility to my report?
I'm personally not particularly happy with that, whilst I still don't have all the information and all the options, because I still feel really uninformed. I don't mind doing what Jeff said in terms of saying, well, an option could be, but we need to give them several different options. We can't just give them that one, and we don't know what all the options are. So I think it's just far too complex. So I think for Friday, I think we should stick with what we're saying at the moment. And then when and if we manage to have a proper discussion on this, if that does turn out to be the only option, then that's when we would make the statement. But I think we need to do our due diligence on this.
I must say that's my view as well, although I would quite like the option of a postponement. Okay, yes, Hal.
Well, am I on?
Yes.
Yeah. I'm not. What we're trying to do is to get those people into a room. So it seems to me that I quite agree that we probably haven't got all the information, but that prospect is possibly the one prospect that would get everybody into the room, because they wouldn't want to be seen to be the cause of something like that. So it may be an empty threat, but I think it is worth raising.
Okay. Okay, thank you. I'll send round, as usual, I'll send round the statement. I think I will probably not mention that specific option in the statement. I may mention it in the oral statement I make, that it was raised by a number of people within this commission as a possibility. that's probably the way to deal with it, I think. Okay, can I move on? Yeah, thank you. So next, so I've lost my agenda. Ian, what's the next? It's reporting back on the
so we're moving now to looking at the reports being considered by the committee on Friday. So the first one of those is the Strategic Rail Investment Report.
That's great. That's David, is it?
David. Also with us is Catherine Vowles, who's our Capital Delivery Manager. I think Catherine's going to just say a few words to introduce the report.
And we've got that for 20 minutes on the agenda, is that right?
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Are you there, David? Or Catherine Vowles?
Yes,
hello.
I'm here. Can you hear me?
I can indeed. Yeah, thanks very much. Welcome to the committee. What would you like to say to us?
So I was just going to briefly summarise the main recommendations in the Strategic Rail Report. It's really doing two things. First of all, it's looking for approval for the 10-year plan. And then there's a couple, there's 3 other recommendations that relate to progressing projects. So just quickly on the 10-year plan, as has been previously noted at this meeting, it's been very much developed in partnership with Network Rail, which is very positive, working alongside their CMSP process. It will evolve, it will continue to evolve alongside their delivery plans. And we will continue to work with Network Rail and the rail operators on the delivery of the plan. But it's very much a joint approach that we're hoping will help us create a joint approach for leveraging further funding in through the RNEP investment process between DfT and Network Rail. The plan itself covers our existing schemes you'll all be aware of, Metro West and the work that Network Rail are going to be doing at Bristol East Junction, Bristol Temple Meads, and including the Bristol Temple Meads Eastern Entrance. It also then looks forward a further 5 years to further aspirations that will be subject to success to securing the funding. But again, looking at potential new stations, improved access and improved capacity across our network so that we can, in the future, deliver more services and more regular services. The 3 other recommendations within the report cover really mechanisms to make sure we can keep projects moving. The first one is some delegations in relation to progressing work on the level crossings in order to deliver the services from the Severn Beach line through to Westbury. Also to approve the delegations for approving the full business case to enable us to match fund the DfT money we've secured for the Access for All funding, which is around improving station access across the region. And finally, to enable us to sign a services agreement with GWR so that we can operate services on the initial services from the end of next year, so from late 21. That's important because obviously in the current circumstances, GWR are working closely with the DfT around services, and we just need to be ready so that we can sign that service agreement and we can get all the preparation in place to get those services underway. One other quick thing I will just mention, the DCO process for the Porter's Line was mentioned earlier. Just to note that the examination is underway for the Porter's Line. 2 meetings have already been held on the 6th and the 19th of October. And they are on track for a decision April 21, well, to complete the examination by April 21 and a decision by the end of the year. So just to update you on that.
Thank you, it's very helpful. Questions? Yes, Vary.
Yeah, I mean, it's great to see kind of on one page like all of the schemes that we're doing in rail, and I think it's quite exciting to see all of these different opportunities. I suppose my question really is around electrification. I find it was only really mentioned twice in the report, once within the decarbonisation and then once in the table in terms of the timescales, etc. Obviously, at the moment we've got serious issues in Bristol with our air pollution. And it seems mad to be putting in things like CAS when you've still got diesel trains coming into the city centre. I just wondered if you could talk a little bit about the plans around electrification and the timescales, and whether or not that's something that is seen as being urgent.
Yes, it is the simple answer. It absolutely is a priority. It's been very heartening for us in our conversations with Network Rail to see that it's a priority for them as well, alongside accessibility, actually. So I think they have been very much empowered and enabled to accelerate both accessibility work, but also electrification. So they're aiming to do more electrification over the next 5-year period than they thought they would pre-COVID, which is great news for us. In order for us to give you a detailed programme, we are working with them at the moment on a delivery plan that sits alongside the 10-year plan, and we're having weekly meetings on this so that we can just make sure we're understanding all the interdependencies. They're obviously developing their plans that sort of sit alongside what they know they've got programmed at the minute, Bristol East Junction being a good example, but that is absolutely a next stage. It's absolutely a priority. It's great that we are now in a position where we are genuinely doing collaborative and joint working on that, and we're not too far away to be able to come back to you to report on that progress.
Thank you. I've got a few questions, but have others got questions? Okay, I'll go with mine. So, Catherine, there's one of the tables in the report that's it's the target frequency table. So I haven't got the report in front of me, but do you know the one I mean?
I do. I haven't got it. I'm just going down through the report now, but I know the one you mean. Yes. It
would be really helpful if it had the existing frequency so we could compare.
Yeah. Yes, absolutely.
One with the other. We don't know if it's an increase. I presume it's an increase in frequency, but we don't actually know that.
No, that's not a problem. We can do that for you.
The mass transit scheme gets a few mentions, but basically we're told it's beyond, the delivery of it is beyond the 10-year scope of this report. That's kind of the first time I've heard that. Is that that's right, is it? We're not going to get any mass transit in the next 10 years.
So there's what we've got with mass transit.
Well, you're just frozen for me. Catherine, has Catherine frozen for everybody else? Catherine, sorry, you've just frozen. Maybe my question was too difficult.
It's a good question.
Catherine, you might want to perhaps turn your video off and see if we can just get you on sound.
Oh, sorry, I lost you there.
We completely lost any of your answer there. So my question is about the mass transit scheme and whether it's beyond the 10-year delivery of this scope of this report.
Yes. So on mass transit, we're looking the strategic outline business case, which will be complete spring next year. We'll cover, we'll look at both routes and look at modes. That will identify where there's crossover with existing or possible future rail network, rail services. If at that point we find that there is an interface between the two, we can amend the 10-year plan to pick up any of those options. So if the mass transit work identifies further rail options, we can absolutely pull that into the 10-year plan. It doesn't mean that we wouldn't start looking at that until the end of that 10-year period.
And would the mass transit have to go through the GRIP process, or would it go through this new process?
We understand that the new process will be rolled out during next year, so we would anticipate that any new service, any new routes or services would go through the new process. That said, if we were progressing well we were progressing a project and that wasn't ready, I don't think we would necessarily wait. We would work with the DFT and with Network Rail to use whatever will be the quickest route to delivery.
So then perhaps the report might be slightly misleading, because it does seem to state clearly that that mass transit is beyond the 10-year scope of the report. What you were saying is, well, if a good proposal comes along, we'll shoehorn it into this 10-year period.
Yes. So what I think what we've said within the plan is that obviously mass transit and delivery of mass transit will take some time, but it'll depend on the solutions that are identified through the strategic outline business case. It's a big program. It's a significant program. If there are options that will integrate with that future plan, what we've done with the 10-year plan is we've said that it is subject to change and update. So if there was something that we could accelerate, we could build it in.
Okay, David, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, sorry. I think that there's just two clarifications. As you putting Kath on the spot, that
sorry,
because mass transit, the modal solution for mass transit or solutions will come out of the current work in the next 2 years. Kath said the SABC will report next year. Whether it's rail-based or not is unknown. And then the question was referred to, will it be taken through the GRIP process? The GRIP process and the successor process, I can't remember the acronym that Kath said, that pertains to rail schemes. So in effect, the demand forecasting that's being done as part of the current mass transit work is pertinent to any mode. But when you then have a modal specific solution, it has to be taken through its own specific theory. I know this is complex. So if it's, for example, an adaptation to road to allow a modal system to travel, or it's rail-based, they'll have to go through the prescribed process for those modes. Does that make sense? So I think the change to GRIP doesn't necessarily pertain to an MRT solution unless it's a rail-based MRT solution.
Okay, thank you. My last question is parochial because it's in my ward. It's Ashton Gate Station. When I read the report, I'm not great encouraged. I mean, obviously the football club are going to be in the Premiership next season, so that's, we need to make plans along that basis. I'm not very encouraged by what I read about Ashton Gate. Am I right, or what's your take on it?
So can I take that one, Kath? That's okay.
Yeah.
We've got another piece. I know this is all very complicated, and we have another piece of work which we are working with the City Council called Southwest Bristol Infrastructure Investment Strategy. That is a piece of work which is currently commissioned, and it will report in the middle of next year. That is intended to look at transport provision in Southwest Bristol, which obviously includes the Ashton Gate area and the extent stations. So that will look at where and if additional station requirements are required. So there's a very specific piece of work that's looking at that. So that will output next year, and that will conclude, where a station would go and if it's required. But quite clearly, that needs to link into the wider 10-year rail plan work. So it is connected up.
Okay, thank you. Other questions from anybody? Barry?
I just wanted to come back on your second question, Stephen, because you are right. It says, I've got it here, page 19 or page 41 in the papers. It says, whilst the study will report in 2021, the scheme development process will take several years and the timescales for delivery lie beyond the 10-year rail delivery plan. So based on what David and Catherine have just said, that's actually inaccurate. So that possibly needs to be changed in the report to reflect the fact that actually it's unknown what the mode of that transport is going to be, and that the report next year will be the one that gives that clarification. So I think that possibly needs to be edited in the report.
Well, I think if it confused both of us, I think that might be right, actually. Hugh.
Yeah, I was delighted to note in the strategy, one of the aims is 100% accessibility via the end of the strategy. When the legislation first came through, I'm not sure of the Equality Act or some other bit of legislation, the original target for fully accessible stations was this year. So I know that people in Nails in Backwell, for instance, will be delighted to see that that's a priority on the schemes. The only question is for the deliverability. do you know if there's any funding being allocated specifically for that? Because if so, that'd be amazing for Nails in Backwell. I was delighted to see it on the report. Basically, is it some words on a piece of paper, or is there any? What's the likelihood that it will happen within the next 10 years, and any knowledge of when in the next 10 years too?
So,
yeah.
So as with the previous question on delivery timescales, we are working through with both the rail operator and Network Rail the delivery plans for the Access for All funding, but also for further funding that we can leverage to address the stations that weren't included for Access for All. So we absolutely anticipate to be able to do those within the 10-year period. We've got to work through those practicalities with both the operator and Network Rail. We're commissioning further work to accelerate that at the moment. But absolutely, it's all within the plan. We've got to sort of bottom out some of the practicalities at certain stations, but Nails in Backwell is on that list.
Brilliant. That's really good to hear, especially that you're willing to put that WECA is willing to put some money beyond the Access for All funding, some of its own money into it. That's really good.
Yes, so there is, yes, absolutely. As part of our strategic rail pot, there is more money that will go to those broader station improvements.
Okay, thank you. Other questions? No? Okay, thank you, Catherine and David. That's really interesting report. We'll move on to the next item, which I think is financial reports.
Yes, so Malcolm Coe, our Director of Investment and Corporate Services, will lead you through those reports, Chair.
Thank you very much.
Hey, Chair,
oh, there you are, Malcolm.
If okay, Chair, I'll take items 12 and 13 together because they both relate to the LEP budgets. Yeah. The first one, item 12, is the LEP budget monitoring forecasted outturn reports. Members be aware that we reported on this in the last committee October. Not much has changed, to be honest. The revenue budgets for the LEP are fairly tightly managed. You'll see there that in figure 1, we show the amount of grants we attract. We still attract a lot of individual grants from government. 8.7 million are now highlighted in figure 1, and we continue to attract more money into the LEP pot. Overall, the budgets, both for LEP and IBB, are pretty much online for the end of the year. So we're projecting a small underspend on the overall LEP budgets and a neutral position on IBB. So the monitoring is pretty much the same as we reported in October. We'll move on to item 13, which is one front door report. To say it still does relate.
Malcolm. Sorry. Should we ask for questions as we go along? Is that okay? So
absolutely fine. I was just going to cover both the LEP budgets to start with and take questions on the whole, Chair. But if you want me to ask questions on all, it works.
Fine, go ahead. That's fine.
So one front door report, and members be aware that the main focus of this report has been the spending of local growth fund. So this 202 million funding is due to run out in March 21, the end of this financial year, and government have been fairly robust with keeping to this time frame. So we've deliberately, as per previous reports, Chair, we have deliberately over-programmed local growth fund by some £12 million on the assumption there'll be some successor funding and to ensure we'd fully spend the grants before the end of this financial year to make sure we don't have to return any of the funding back to the central pot. So what's been announced now is clearly a Getting Building Fund, which has given us a 13.7 million allocation in the west of England. And the first 12 million we offset against that new funding has been the over-programming of local growth fund. The remaining 1.7 million is a new scheme focused in North Somerset in Weston-super-Mare. So the whole 13.7 million we have committed, but there are still time constraints and pressures to deliver both the local growth fund and Getting Building Fund in quite a tight time frame. So local growth fund, just to recap, has to be spent by March 21. The new 13.7 million, as detailed in this report, item 13, has to be spent by the end of March 22. But at the moment, government is saying that 50% of the new funding, 13.7 million, has also to be spent by March 21. So there's a huge pressure to continue the pace on deliverability. We are working closely with officers in the UAs to ensure we do deliver by the required time frame. But of course, with COVID and certain delays on projects, it's not without risk, but we will keep members informed of progress made on all key areas. That's all I wanted to say, Chair, by way of introduction to both items 12 and 13 in terms of the LEP budgets.
Thank you. Do people have questions? Yes, Winston.
Yeah, just thank you, Malcolm. Yeah, you're right. There's not much of a delta since we last spoke in October. Just on the LEP budget, can you just remind us, the staff has leapt by 603k against budget, and the services and third-party payments have leapt by 948k. Can you just remind us why that is such a difference to budget?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm happy to do that. It relates to the fact we've actually attracted more money in since the beginning of the year. So you'll see in a corresponding income, the amount of grants coming in has also increased by a similar margin. So in effect, what it really means is money's come in more than we set the budget, and we spent the money on staffing and third party to actually deliver against that grant funding for its intended purpose. So it's actually a positive news, really, that actually we attracted more money in when we originally set the 2021 budget.
Okay, second question, just on the LEP front door funding. I see, just from a parochial point of view, that Bath Quays is overspending due to delays, both on Bath Quays South and Bath Quays Bridge. Is there anything you could report on that? I know it's a bit of detail.
I'm not close enough to the individual schemes. I'm not aware of any significant overspending. It's more about the timing and the phasing of spend. So we're very mindful we've got to deliver the spend, as I say, by the March 21 deadline. And those which we felt are more at risk of delivering by that March 21 deadline, we've actually moved into what we call the Getting Building Fund to try and mitigate that where possible. Obviously, this is the only allocation we got, the 13.7 million, and unitaries are aware that should there be overspends on individual projects, they would have to try and absorb that underspend within their own capital programs. But as of today, we're not aware of any significant overspends that cannot be absorbed within the current finance available. Okay.
And the third question is, we're covering Invest in Bath and Bristol in this section, aren't we? Is that's part of these two sections? I just noted that they are on budget, and that's quite interesting in itself to me, that they were actually bang on budget. Just if you could remind us that this coming together of Bath and Bristol, Invest in Bath and Bristol, that's slightly separate from the tourism coming together, is it? That's a mutually exclusive, not mutually exclusive, but it's a different part of what's happening on the scheme of bringing them together.
So Invest in Bristol and Bath has been a £1 million budget for several years now. It was previously funded through EDF, and from the start of this financial year, we moved it over to what's called Revolving Infrastructure Fund. The £1 million is most of that is committed in terms of ongoing staffing spend, as well as promotional schemes which they've been doing for several years. It's basically focused on inward investment into the area. So it's part of Stephen Bashford's overall offering in terms of the skills and investment into the region. I think over time what we need to do is really integrate these budgets more into the whole business and skills allocation. It's just a way that obviously the IBB budget relates to 4 authorities, as opposed to a lot of the WECA business and skills budgets relates to the 3. But we can provide updates in terms of what the outcomes are from Invest in Bristol and Bath at a future meeting, if that's helpful.
Okay, yeah. And the final point was Stephen Bashford made the comment in October's presentation that and it had been raised in their meetings, the term growth hub is a pre-COVID expression, given where businesses generally are at the moment about survival. He raised the point that maybe that title is a bit of an anachronism for where we are in January 2021. So just an observation which I share with him. And I think most people in the business community do, of where the agenda is going to be on COVID, Brexit and the green economy. It's not all about growth. It's about survival and maintaining and other things.
Stephen's on the call, so I'm sure he can comment on that if it helps, Chair.
Thank you.
Yeah, happy to. And you're right. It's more than just growth. At the moment, we're we have Growth Hub because that's how government describes them, and the additional resource through government to support recovery has flowed through growth hubs. And therefore we need to recognise that national brand, if you like. But I suspect there's opportunity to think about that differently going forward. In some of our regional comms, we talk about, West of England business support and Weka business support, so not always describing it as growth hub, but for the purposes of landing further financial support from government to help businesses at this really difficult time, it is the kind of national brand at the moment. But I think it's a discussion we should keep having, because you're right, it's about messaging. So where we need to describe it differently so companies can access the support, we should do.
Thank you. Is that it, Winston? Have you finished?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. I see Hal with his hand up. Hal?
Yes, I also was interested in Invest in Bath and Bristol, and I actually have been trying to find some literature, and I was wondering if they produce an annual report that gives some details. I'm particularly interested in the investment in the North East Somerset side. So I would be very keen to see some presentations in the future, but I wonder if someone could provide me with some literature already.
Again, Stephen's probably best to come in on that one.
Yeah, we'd be very happy to do that. I'm very happy to do a session with Scrutiny. We've at the last business board, we did a dashboard-based presentation on how the service has been doing. And interestingly, the bit of context is that there has still been interest in the region. Although we're in a terrible economic situation, there has been interest from some sectors and opportunities and some landings as well. But be very happy to bring a similar presentation that we gave to the business board to Scrutiny at a later date, so we can get into the detail.
Very good.
Thank you. Any other questions? Okay, Malcolm, do you want to go on to the next section, which is the Weka and Merrell Budget outturn?
Again, Chair, if okay with you, I'll take items 14 and 15 together because they are both linked. 14 is the revenue budgets of Weka, whereas 15 is the allocation of investment funds. So if I quickly summarise what's in those reports and then take questions. So the first one, item 14, the Weka and Merrell budget, again, not an awful lot changed since the October reporting cycle. The Merrell budget, as members will know, is fairly well self-contained. It contains a small element of running cost of the mayoral office, an annual allocation towards the four-yearly election cost of the Weka Mayor, and a passport of capital grants, highways grants into the UAs. So we're forecasting a very small underspend overall in terms of Merrell budgets. The Weka budget itself, as per October, we're still projecting a surplus at the end of the year, which is more or less entirely down to surplus treasury management. But I'm sure you won't be surprised to hear that the ability for us to maintain those levels of returns are incredibly challenging in the current environment. The sort of investments, we are still fairly cash heavy in terms of the holdings of Weka cash in terms of the timing of our spend on major capital projects. But the sort of investments we're getting at the moment on 1 year money is about 0.2, 0.3% at best. So although it's showing a surplus at the moment, we do expect that certainly as we go through the financial year and into next year, our ability to generate cash returns from our investments is going to be incredibly difficult. But good news in terms of the current year, as I say, we are forecasting we will deliver a surplus. I'll be looking later in the financial year to put some of that into a specific reserve related to treasury management, just to deal with the pressures we're undoubtedly going to face in 21-22. In terms of investment fund then, so this is the one that always raises the most interest because this is around the allocation and prioritisation of our £350 million investment programme up to March 2023. You'll see there again, following on from the October report, the key recommendations are linked to how we use the headroom. So we challenged back in October the deliverability of all the projects within our £350 million programme. We identified an allocation of headroom in terms of projects which we just wouldn't spend the money on by March 23. Not many projects came out of the programme. A lot of it just was pushed to the right in terms of the ability to spend and realism around deliverability. We've now got £36 million that we can reallocate. And this report makes recommendations about how that £36 million of headroom should be allocated. So you'll see here, we mentioned around a development infrastructure fund, and this is around how we invest in tricky sites, how we use WECA funding to try and unlock and accelerate development in key strategic sites around the region. So we have criteria for development infrastructure fund as an appendix 2 to the investment fund report. We also have the first project which looks to draw down funding from this new fund. It is Hengrove Park, and members will see in there that we're looking for £12 million to be allocated in this current investment period up to March 23, with a further £7.8 million to be spent beyond March 23. The project will return £5 million back into the investment fund, which is a key criteria of the new development infrastructure fund, to be able to repay at least a proportion to try and create some sustainability to our overall funding pot available. Other key recommendations are around £2 million for a housing and regeneration enabling fund and £2 million for strategic master planning. The key objectives of both these recommendations is to try and move forward at pace, to try and bring more sites forward with momentum so they can access the capital funding such as Development Infrastructure Fund to try and actually get shovel-ready schemes ready to be able to deliver more in the region and access more funding from government where feasible. So that's the key allocations in terms of recommendations 1 to 4. Other recommendations this time around in the investment fund report, the strategic outline business case for Charfield. Charfield has been an allocation in our investment programme for some time now. There's a minor amendment to our assurance framework to try and make it more slick in terms of match funding, not requiring full business case where we already have access big funding from external sources. And you'll see there's a 500,000 match fund into the one public estate bid that we're suggesting. Other recommendations for members could read them: more money on spatial development strategy and a full business case for the Chew Valley Lake Recreational Trail. So a lot in there, as one can imagine, but we do follow the same strategic themes of our investment programme over several months now. So that is a very quick whistle-stop tour as to what the key recommendations are in the WECA revenue and capital budgets this time around. Happy to take questions, Chair.
Vary, did you want to report back on your group subcommittee at this stage?
I mean, we discussed the future transport zones proposals, which were included in as a budget line.
Ian, when do you think would be an appropriate moment to bring in? I know we've got adult skills as well, which fits in on the agenda.
Probably near the end. I don't know if it's necessarily related to the.
Okay, we'll do it after this. That's fine. Thank you.
But I did have a question.
Great, thank you. Go ahead.
I just get in there. Yeah, so my question really was the Emergency Active Travel Fund on page 100. Obviously, it mentions the 3 million that we were allocated by government, but on the press release on the 29th of June, we obviously mentioned that we're allocating a further 10 million towards active travel. Unfortunately, I couldn't see it at all in any of the figures around that spend. So I just wondered where that money was and kind of which pot of funding that was kind of coming out of.
So in terms of emergency active travel funding, I mean, hopefully members will be aware that we use WECA funding as a cash flow to try and get things mobilised quickly. We've now had confirmation from government around our tranche 2 for emergency active travel funding, and it is slightly more than we anticipated. I think in total we get about 3.7 million as opposed to the 3 million. So we're able to repay back into the WECA investment fund and have a bit more in terms of the schemes available. David, do you want to comment on the wider investment in terms of emergency travel measures?
The 10 million that was mentioned in the press release in June, that doesn't seem to be in the figures.
So the 10 million, I'm not sure we're getting confused on this one, but we did actually allocate 10 million pounds of WECA funding from the investment fund for more permanent measures. So remember, the emergency active travel fund is about mobilising things quickly from government to try and get temporary measures up and running. We did create a pot of 10 million, you're absolutely right, in terms of WECA funding to try and make more permanent measures to encourage walking and cycling. But in terms of where we're at with that, David, do you want to comment on that?
Whereabouts is it, Malcolm, in terms of the figures? Because I couldn't see it in any of the tables.
It would be in the
measures.
It would be an investment fund. Let me have a look, 2 secs.
It's the LCWIIP, which is different from the emergency.
The LCWIP, but LCWIP already had funding allocated towards it, didn't it? I thought this was going to be additional, or is it just a re-announcement of?
My understanding is that was 10. My understanding is that was a 10 million. But
oh, really? Okay. So my understanding was the LCWIP was always going to be supported and funded through WECA. So my surprise would be, why are we re-announcing funding as something different?
I'm flicking through, but I'll have to get back to you on that one, really.
Yeah, thank you, Malcolm.
We definitely made a 10 million allocation in the investment fund, and you're right, Councillor. We did mention that, so it must be in the figures somewhere. But I need to actually, in terms of a detailed line, I'm happy to provide a written answer on that one.
Cheers, thank you.
Sorry, Malcolm. Can I just caught the end of that? Is that a question I can answer or not?
Possibly, David. I was just asking because Appendix 1 doesn't really show the £10 million that was announced in June. For the more permanent measures for cycling and walking. Winston's saying that might be related to the LCWIP, but my understanding was that there was always going to be a need to fund the schemes proposed within the LCWIP. So is it the same funding, or was it actually new and additional funding that was announced in June?
No, it was an additional 10 million announced in June. Yeah. Yeah,
that's what I thought. Yeah. So it's just missing from the papers.
Yeah, I'm going to have to get back on that. It might be that because we haven't made the firm allocations yet, we've only put a first amount. But the 10 million, I can reassure you, the 10 million is definitely accounted for in the whole 350 million programme. I do take on board your point. It's not showing 10 million as one line on that.
Yeah, don't worry. I mean, I won't take up any.
I've got Hal, but Winston, is your point directly on this?
But it is sort of, yes, it is the answer, because Malcolm, you just said that the did you say the 2.96 is now nearer 3.7? That was the emergency, the tranche 2, or did I misunderstand you?
Do you want me to take that one, Malcolm?
Well, yeah, but I'll answer first, but absolutely I'll bring you in, David. So there was 2 tranches of funding for the emergency active travel. So the first tranche was only around 700,000, and the second tranche is now being confirmed at 2.9 million. So in total, it's around 3.7 million compared to our WECA cash flow free bill. Sorry, David, do you want to come in?
No, that's it. That's correct. Yeah, that's what it is.
Okay, Hal?
On your agenda item 15, I very much welcomed the full business case for the Chew Valley Lake Recreational Trail, which I was able to download and read. And it seems a very comprehensive job, although it doesn't actually mention the commitment of the money there. Can I just check that is going to go through okay and receive funding?
As far as I'm aware, Chair, it will do for business case stacks up recommendations in a report to progress.
Very good. And I don't know whether I'm on page 111 of the 4th of December report, the business case development. There's mention of preparing a case for the Summer Valley Enterprise Zone. And they're making a business case. I wondered who was doing that, whether I would be able to contact them. And I guess there would be a feasibility study that would have been done if you're making the business case. The feasibility study would have been done. Would it be possible for me to see that?
So the Summer Valley feasibility study business case will be developed within Bath and North East Somerset offices. But in terms of the actual particular officer who's leading on that, I'm afraid I don't know that offhand, but by all means, I can find that out. And as soon as you'll be aware of all of these things, we try and make everything available in a transparent way. So once we have the feasibility study and the outline business cases, we do link them to the actual reports as we go through. But I'm afraid I'm not sure what the officer is who's actually leading on Somer Valley. David or Stephen, would you know?
Simon Martin.
It is Simon, is it? Yeah.
Okay, so I could email him.
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Hal. Other questions, anybody? I've got a question, Malcolm. So in the reports, it talks about, I actually can't remember which one, business rates retention scheme and the impact of that, the income that's received from that by WECA. Clearly, there's real concerns about business rates collection because of the collapse of the high street and other factors. Would that impact on WECA, or is WECA's amount of that sort of guaranteed?
It's not guaranteed, Chair, not at all. And in fact, in our previous monitoring report, our share of business rates retention is just 5% of the total West of England pilot. So the West of England pilot is worth around £15 million a year. WECA use 1.2 million, and that 1.2 million feeds into our core budget for funding core WECA staff. We reported last time around, we did see this happening at the end of last financial year. We set a specific reserves on business rates for £500,000 as part of a 1920 outturn. And in the October report, we actually drew down 403,000 against that £500,000 pot. So in effect, in the current year, 2020-21, we're anticipating receiving around 800,000 against a 1.2 million budget and having to use 400,000 of a reserve to top that up. In terms of next year, the financial announcements made by government last week, the business rates retention pilot will roll forward for a further year. So in effect, we'll be reliant on another 1.2 million of budget from WECA from the business rates retention pilot. And at the moment, it's highly doubtful we're going to achieve that 1.2 million. So we are working with the unitaries to understand what the overall business rates collection is going to be in the West of England and the impact on the pilot as a whole. But I think we're all quite concerned about our ability to be able to hit the targets, which we are clearly within that pilot, the pilot 15 million a year. So it's something we're keeping under review. In terms of the current year for WECA's budgets, we've covered that in terms of a specific reserve that we earmarked for it. It is an issue which we're keeping under constant review for 21-22.
And presumably that appears somewhere on a WECA risk register, does it?
Yeah, absolutely. It's not. We got a wider risk register. Risk on the corporate risk register for WECA around the volatility of annual revenue funding. It's been an issue on the risk register for some time for us. It's not just a business rates retention pilot. Our long-term investment capital, our investment fund, is for 30 years, but our revenue in terms of funding the core capacity of WECA has always been hand-to-mouth annual budgets. So you've got the business rates retention pilot, you've got Merrell capacity fund, which is annual allocations, you've got housing capacity fund, which is a 3-year allocation, and we were trying to lobby government about trying to give more certainty regarding multi-year settlement for revenue funding for combined authorities. Unfortunately, because of the COVID situation, any hopes of a multi-year settlement last Wednesday didn't come to fruition, but it's something where we're continuing to lobby and hopeful that something will be announced in 2021.
And that leads me to a wider question, which is, I don't see the risk register, the corporate risk register, contained within the reports for Friday's meeting. Is that never included within those papers?
It's always available, Chair. I mean, the risk register is reviewed more often, Councillor Gollop will know this, by the audit committee. So audit committee is charged with governance. So things like the monitoring and evaluation framework, the risk register is something which the audit committee keeps under review, but it is available for viewing.
Is it, Jeff? Are you happy that so you're covering that off? It sounds like, is that? Are you happy with that process?
Yes, I think it happens in an appropriate way. I think, as ever, audit committee is looking to ensure that the procedures are in place to govern the risks. It's not necessarily looking at the details of the risks. So I wouldn't it might be appropriate for it from time to time to come to scrutiny for members to actually pick up some of the detail of those risks from a wider knowledge base. But from the governance point of view, it's covered.
What do other members think? I'm sorry, I'm going off on a slight tangent here, but what do other members think? Yes, Winston.
I think that would be helpful. I mean, if audit do that on a regular basis, I think we ought to have sight of that, particularly in the post-COVID world. I'm spending a lot of my time in the corporate sector on risk registers and updating them because the world has changed so dramatically and will do in 2021. So I don't want to cut across what audit's doing, but I think if we're to do our job properly, we ought to have sight of that at a fixed point, either in the year or some schedule, because it tells you so much about an organisation and the challenges it faces, particularly at this moment in time. It's become the most important document in my field, in the corporate sector, and how organisations are adapting to the very changed environment that they're operating on.
Yeah, again, I don't want to cut across what you're doing, Jeff, but it does feel we might be able to add some useful input to that. I'm not sure what you think would be an appropriate, frequency for us to look at that.
Well, if I just add, I don't think it's cutting across in the slightest. I actually think, providing it's done in a constructive way, it actually helps to end, because I've always argued that risk is not the responsibility either of the audit committee or the financial officers. It's actually the responsibility of everybody, and it's much better if we have that wider experience. I think I'd look to Malcolm for guidance on this. I mean, my inclination is that certainly it would be no more than once a year would be an appropriate time for it to be considered. But if I also put it in the context in Bristol, we use the risk register to help us on scrutiny, identify areas that we might want to do additional work on. And therefore it could be used to highlight aspects that we might wish to inquire into. So I'd welcome it, but what I don't want to do is give Malcolm and his team significant amounts of additional work. So if we can do it in a balanced way, I think that will be good.
I'll come to Valerie before I ask Malcolm for a response. No?
Sorry, I was just saying hi to the delivery guy.
Okay. I would actually prefer sort of more than once a year, personally, but Malcolm, what do you think?
In terms of additional work for us, Chair, it really isn't, because we're in terms of an organisation, like any organisation, we update our risk register on a monthly basis. So it goes through our senior management team. As members are alluded to, it's a very living document, current world we live in. So it's something we can pick up at any point and present to any forum. What I would avoid, though, is obviously going down rabbit holes. So it's absolutely right that any members can have a look at our risk register and challenge and question, are we managing risk appropriately? What I wouldn't want it to do is look at any a dozen risks on the register and go into the ordinate amount of detail. So I've got no problem. It's a transparent document. We can present it twice yearly to the committee of scrutiny if you feel it's appropriate.
Could it,
in your hands, really?
Thank you. As a starting point, could it, and I endorse what you say, but could it come to our next informal scrutiny meeting, which is in a month or so time, just so we can have an initial look at it? Would that be okay?
Absolutely. I say it's ready for inspection whenever, because it's a living document, so absolutely fine.
Ian, are you happy to note that down as an item for that agenda?
Yes, we have a meeting in early January, Chair, so we can bring it to that meeting.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for indulging me in that. Any other questions? Okay, Malcolm, thank you. Very clear as ever. You've finished now, I think, haven't you?
I have, and just to repeat, in terms of 10 million walking and cycling schemes, I will get a written answer on that one, Chair. I'm assuming it's in the tail attached to the transportation allocation, because we haven't got the detailed business cases yet. But I will confirm that in writing, as I say. Yeah.
Thank you. So we've got, I think, next on the next item is the adult education budget, which we'll deal with. Then perhaps we'll take the skills group report, and then Valerie will go on to the transport subgroup report, if that's okay. So Stephen, is Stephen talking to us about the adult education? Stephen Bashford?
Yeah, I'll kick off and then I'll bring in Henry Laws, who's our programme manager for adult education, who can go into the detail.
Thank you.
Just a bit of a reminder in terms of the progress that we've made so far on adult education budget. We now have a more focused provider base for delivering adult education in the region. And we have with each of those providers now a curriculum delivery plan. This gives us the foundations to enable us to plan provision much more effectively, so it meets the needs of our economy. What Henry will just talk through is our plans for next year and how we're going to take that a step further. But I just wanted to also draw a link to the investment fund report, Chair, because there's in there a recommendation around support for additional funding for adult education budget. So this is money that's come from government as part of its recovery package, which aligns with the adult education budget and will specifically help individuals that have been made unemployed or at risk of long-term unemployment, to give them some tailored support to help them back into jobs where there are vacancies in our economy. That's important because it's another example of how devolved adult education budget can work alongside additional resource from government to drive impact. But I'll hand over to Henry now to talk through some of the details of the paper. Henry, over to you.
Thanks, Stephen. Yes, so basically the paper just outlines the proposed approach for the 21-22 academic year, which will start 1st of August 2021. It outlines an approach which we believe is an iterative approach, developing upon the approach for the 1920 and the 20-21 academic year. It proposes a way forwards for having more defined provider plans and understanding the delivery in the Weka region and how that will benefit Weka residents, businesses, communities and the wider economy. It also contains proposal around the minimum contract value and how we are intending to create a more streamlined, more responsive group of prime providers with larger contract values, and then working with them through subcontracting arrangements to create a fully comprehensive package of adult education delivery, which benefits our residents and actually responds to the key identified pressure points for education and skills within the local industrial strategy, employment and skills plan, and the COVID-19 response, as well, to cover off both the long-term and the current pandemic challenges that we're facing. And a number of smaller recommendations, all of which are designed to develop the delivery further across those first two academic years. So that's the basic approach within the paper. But very happy to take any questions, Councillor Clark, or from colleagues that you might want to pose.
Thank you. Do you have any questions from anybody?
Is this where you would like me to feedback now?
Well,
and then
let's just see if there's any general questions first, and then we'll have you, if that's okay, Hugh. Okay, Hugh, please go ahead.
Brilliant. So thank you so much for Henry and Naomi and Stephen for meeting with us. I think it was really useful to go into it in depth. The one thing that, so we asked quite a lot, we scrutinised this quite a lot. One thing I think was really useful for you to explain to us the minimum contract value better, because we were a bit cautious around that, but having listened to you, we're now, well, I think all of us are quite convinced that by doing this, you are focusing on providers that add value, and if there are any small providers that do provide, really good quality support for people in the west of England, they can be added as a subcontractor. That's where there's a space for them. There were some questions on English as a second language training, and it looks like the work Councillor Massey can probably, sorry if I pronounced your name incorrectly, Councillor Massey, has provided some more feedback, has invited West of England officers to see the good work going on in Bristol, where they've brought together ESL providers to do a strategy. One thing that we didn't, sorry, I'm trying to do this in a more structured way. Basically, really welcome the report, welcome the fact that whilst things haven't changed yet, 15,000 to 16,000 people have benefited from the adult education budget so far. We thought that was really good. Officers also said that whilst they didn't have exact data on who's benefiting at the moment, in a few weeks' time they might. So if you have had that data since, it'd be great for us to hear. The other thing was we would encourage, we welcome FE colleges working up, doing more joint working, because I think in the past, joint working hasn't been hasn't been going on much within the region. So we welcome the way that WECA has encouraged joint working. We encourage FE and HE providers to work towards climate emergency targets. It would be great to see them all signed up towards our climate emergency targets in link with the green industrial strategy going on at the moment. I think some officers were quite, Stephen was quite receptive to that when we spoke about that. The only other thing that I think would be quite useful to hear about now is we didn't ask about on point 17 of this report of yours on the adult education budget. It says that other options were considered, but they weren't put forward as recommendations because they didn't adequately balance change versus impact. Could we just get a bit more, sorry that this is a bit rambled, but could we just get a bit more commentary on that? I think that would be useful to hear. Just why you decided not to choose the options you chose not to choose.
Yes, certainly. I mean, the option that's proposed, which is that we retain the core large providers within the historical provider base, and the provider base we're working with AEB is an inherited provider base, one which was delivering in our baseline year, which was 17-18. The option that we propose, we believe, cuts the middle ground between retaining as much stabilisation within the provider base as is practicably possible, whilst also starting to affect the changes that we regionally need to see within adult education to make it more responsive to our residents. Other options at the at the pendulum swing end of that could have been that we could have just simply retained the full provider base as it was, just carried on delivering as it was, but then the sense is that the change factor wouldn't have been great enough to impact on residents and communities and the economy. On the other hand, we could have completely dismantled the provider base or made a recommendation around that and rebuild it from scratch. Some of our large providers in the region are tentpole providers. They deliver significant provision across 16 to 18 and other funding streams which are directly engaged with our residents and benefit them. There was a sense that that would have too much of a destabilising impact on some of those providers, especially those with the largest contract values. If you just simply removed those contracts, how would that impact on them? So therefore, the middle ground was the one which seemed to provide the best change versus stability at the same point in time, if that answers your question, Councillor James.
Yeah, that's really helpful. That would have been really helpful, thank you. And I don't suppose you've had that information about who's benefited. I know that you were going to do some, you were analysing it at the time we spoke last. I don't suppose you've been able to get that work, more detailed work on who's benefited from the adult education budget so far and who will benefit.
So we haven't finished the analysis on 1920 yet. That's not a particularly kind of very short immediate process. We do need to take a little bit of time to get through that work, and that's ongoing now. We have an information about who's prospective to be benefited in 2021 through the curriculum delivery plans, and we do have that detail already. And the detail around 21-22, which is the subject of this paper, will emerge as we discuss and agree the curriculum delivery plans with the provider base, which we anticipate to be, once we have a governance green light and everything is in order, we'll move forwards with that in after Christmas time.
Brilliant, thank you very much. I think that's sort of the pressing points that we noted in the skills panel and the things that I didn't think to ask. So any other questions? Brenda, sorry. Stephen, are you, I'm sure it's fine for me to, yeah, Brenda.
Stephen, I couldn't see you then. Yeah, it was an extremely useful session, I thought, to have the opportunity to go through things in a lot more detail than we can in most of these meetings. And I think everybody was agreed that actually adult education and training in general is going to be really vital with the after effects of the pandemic and so many people losing their jobs and the need to reskill and improve their education accordingly. So I found that very helpful. I think one of the things that we were intending to pick up on a bit more, Hugh, was about how to help people with learning difficulties.
Yes, yeah.
Their education. So it would be useful in future to have a bit more information about that. And if we could continue to have more, small group discussions, I think that would be really, really helpful, because otherwise we would be taking up a lot of time on these sessions. And I just feel we need to keep on top of all this and understand exactly what's happening. So thank you.
Yes, thank you for the work. It's really useful.
Would it be okay, Chair, just to ask, just picking up from what Brenda said, could we have a bit more commentary from adult education things tailored towards people with learning disabilities? It's just one area that we didn't have a look at because we didn't quite have the time.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, to reassure councillors, learners with learning difficulties and disabilities are absolutely identified as a key cohort for support through adult education budget, and support is provided across a range of providers. I don't have the specific details beyond that in terms of numbers and what kind of provision, etc. But we could certainly discuss that, and I would anticipate that information will emerge with the 1920 full year analysis, which, as I said, we're undergoing now. But yes, absolutely recognise the point that's being made.
Brilliant. In which case, just from all of us looking into in this subgroup, thank you very much for for going through this. It was really helpful to have that sort of deep dive, and I think it sort of meant that we could focus on the important things during this bit of this meeting. Thank you.
Thanks so much. Hal?
Yeah, can I just add on the question about support for people with learning difficulties? It's worth noting, so outside of our adult education budget, the programme We Work for Everyone, which has been pulled together across the west of England with the unitary authorities. It's a combination of European social funding and 1.3 million from the Weka investment fund, which aims to support 2,000 people with complex learning needs across the region. That's very close to going live. So it's worth, in response to the question about what can adult education budget do, to get an example of how we can use adult education budget alongside other funding support to drive impact. So I just thought I'd raise that one. That's very close to going live in the region.
Thank you, Stephen. Hal?
My question, I think, it's almost the same as I asked last time, is what is the mechanism by which someone who's long-term unemployed or unemployed, what's the mechanism by which they actually end up in adult education?
The adult education budget has a number of statutory entitlements within it, which are around qualification, prior achievement levels, English and maths, first of all level 2, first of all level 3, etc. And so there is a route for anybody, irrespective of their employment status, to access provision that way. The way that the national funding rules have evolved over time is that they've really honed in beyond that core target group to those that are unemployed. And so those that are unemployed are the most likely group now beyond those statutory entitlements to attract full funding for their provision. I wouldn't want to give any more specifics than that at this stage, because I'd need to go away and look at the details of those eligibility requirements to give you a full answer. But certainly unemployed individuals are appear to be the next priority within the national funding rules after the statutory entitlements. And as part of our approach to stability, we have continued to adopt the vast majority of the national funding rules, but are starting to introduce changes to adapt to our local needs in the local area. We haven't made any changes to anything around unemployment from the national funding rules.
So is it up to those people to make the first move, or do you actually contact them directly?
At the moment, it would be up to the learner to approach a learning provider in order to access provision. However, that begets a really important point, which is around careers information, advice and guidance, and the importance of supporting, providing support to residents to help them make the most informed choices that they can, that help them achieve their own aims and objectives, further skills development, employment, etc., etc. And adult education is definitely focused on an economic outturn in terms of moving people from unemployment to employment. So at the moment, residents would need to identify that they have a training need and approach a provider, but there is a role of advice and guidance to play absolutely in that place.
Can I just add, it might help in the response that I think seeing adult education budget as part of a suite of employment skills services that we provide across the region, such as Future Bright, which has been flexed to support people that have been affected by COVID, such as our rapid response to redundancies. All of these are all routes for individuals to access the support that's out there. So I think it's a combination really in terms of your response. But having touch points like Future Bright, where there are individuals able to give one-to-one support to then broker into the employment skills system, is really important. So I think just worth thinking about that in the context of, I think your question was asking about how accessible it is. And I think there's lots of ways that people can get into adult education through these various other programs that we have.
Thank you. Thank you. Any other questions on this? Okay, thank you to the officers very much. That's really, really helpful. And thank you.
Yeah, I just wonder.
Yes. Go ahead, Ian.
Sorry, I just wondered, Councillor James circulated a note from the subgroup. I just wondered if you wanted that to be included as an appendix to your comments to the committee on Friday, perhaps.
Would you like me to do that, Hugh? I mean, that seems like a useful idea.
I think that would be helpful just to show the full amount of scrutiny that's done into it. Yeah, sure, that would be really helpful.
Perhaps the same with Vari's. Vari, do you want to talk to us now about your transport subgroup? We're going to end up with 3 appendices to the report, which is the first time we've ever had any appendices, I think, which is quite good.
Yeah, Hugh's shown me to shame, actually, because I haven't circulated my comments in advance, but I'll make sure to do that, Stephen, so you can include them as appendices. The report. So we had a discussion about 3 different topics at our subgroup meeting. The first was a discussion around future transport zones. Future transport zones are a national programme. So we've secured £24 million from the DFT alongside a Southampton Portsmouth partnership and the West Midlands. Future transport zones, the idea of them is really to take a smart approach to transport. What that really means is it's around the sort of data-led, data-informed transport. And as part of our project, we've got 5 separate components of this. So looking at mobility as a service, transport on demand, looking at smart stations. So looking at how we're using data within different transport modes. So we had a range of questions and a really good discussion on this. as I understand it, there looks like there might be an app-based approach. So there is going to be an app that would support with transport and travel planning as part of this data-led approach. We did question whether or not this was the right way forward, given the fact that there is so much competition already out there in terms of transport planning and apps, and that would require people to download it onto their smartphone. Not everyone has access to smartphones. There's a whole issue and challenge there. And there would really need to be sort of effective communications if an app-based approach was the right way of gathering data around people's transport habits. Something we raised on that was actually the use of data and the ethics requirements in terms of gathering people's data to inform our transport plan. Obviously, other apps like Google Maps already gather our data. I mentioned the Netflix program, which is all around social media and how they're using our data and the ethics surrounded by that. So there was a really good discussion on that, and that is something that is going to be really thought through and considered as part of the Future Transport Zones project. Obviously, this is a 4-year project, so it's likely that we're not going to be seeing outputs immediately. It's still very much early days and in the process of developing its scope. One of the projects, as I say, was mobility as a service and on-demand transport. There are 2 separate projects. Mobility service is one and on-demand transport is another. We have had previously in the region pilots around on-demand transport. So first ran a pilot, I think it was up in Henbury. One of the challenges with that was that people were paying something like £7 to get equivalent of a minibus / taxi to a bus stop, and then of course catching a bus on one of our major routes. So there was an affordability challenge there, I think, and that's something that really needs to be considered, is if we are going down the route of mobility as a service or on-demand transport, particularly for areas like, say, Avonmouth, where you have variable shift patterns, we need to make sure that that is a service that's affordable, and affordable as well compared to them getting in their car, because there needs to be an option there. So whether it's a carrot or whether it's a stick, if it's cheaper and easier for people just to drive, they will drive. So if we are going to be serious about our climate change commitments, if we are serious about air pollution, if we are serious about improving our public transport to ensure it's accessible to people on complex shift work in places like Avonmouth, we really need to be thinking about the affordability aspect. So it was raised that maybe that's something as part of the project that needs to be considered, is what do people consider to be affordable when they're thinking about using alternative transport modes, and then also responding to need when people actually would need access to transport. But I think that's all part of the project, is that's what the project will hopefully answer, is actually, when do people need transport, how do they need transport, where do they go to and from. Obviously, as I say, we've done pilot projects in the region on these sorts of things in the past. There's also a lot of other cities that have done projects on these sort of things in the past. So it's really important that we're very clear about our value proposition. So why are we doing it? What additional information are we looking at getting from this project? And a recommendation was linking up to perhaps universities or other areas that are knowledge bases that would have some of this information and be able to support with the innovative aspect of the future transport zones. So that was kind of the discussion on the first topic. Our second topic was around e-scooters, which was slightly more brief. Just that the e-scooter project is obviously going. They're looking at extending the geographical areas in both Bristol and Bath. There was some challenge, I think, raised potentially by Hal, which was around the extension of those geographical areas. You're starting to bring in other complications like really steep hills compared to, say, in Bristol city centre, where you have a fairly flat surface. So it's how we ensure that this is something that people still see value from. And then the third topic we looked at was the COVID reductions in travel. So the impact that that's had on both the patterns of motor vehicles, buses, rail, and how that has recovered since COVID. One of the most worrying things, I think, is just before lockdown, we were seeing the exact same traffic levels. So traffic levels were back to normal in the evening peak. So we had the exact same number of cars we had a comparative time last year. Given how many people were still working from home at that time, obviously this puts in an additional worry. Could we even exceed that evening peak when we come out of lockdown and tier 3 again? So the ask was, you know, what is our strategy? What is our plan for tackling this? How do we support and enable people to get back on public transport? How do we support and enable people to use sustainable modes for shorter trips, etc.? And the strategy essentially is going to be a communications campaign. And I think the plan was to launch that just in sort of October, November time. Obviously we went back into lockdown, so that didn't happen. So I think the idea is that communications campaign happens in sort of January, February time, to encourage people to kind of really think through their transport options, so that we can prevent absolute gridlock occurring when everyone goes into their car as we move out of lockdown and we all get vaccines, if everyone heard the news this morning. So just how we manage that communication campaign is really important. Interestingly, just before lockdown, the rail figures were up to normal, but the bus figures were still down. But of course, there's an increased frequency on bus routes, which I think was a brilliant response, actually. And I think a lot of thanks has to go out to those officers who managed to get that increase in bus services, because we've been seeing quite 50% capacity on those buses. So yeah, so we had, as I say, quite a robust discussion on those 3 topics, but I'll leave it there for now.
Thank you very much. That's really useful. Have we got any questions for Vari? No? Okay. Oh, yes, Jeff.
It's more of a comment, but Vari mentioned the on-demand transport, and it was actually in Henleaze and Westbury-on-Trim ward, and it was specifically Henleaze. But I just wanted to provide a bit of background information, because it was set up by First in conjunction with UWE, and it was designed to help people travelling out of Bristol, because they discovered a significant number of people who worked at UWE and in the surrounding areas were actually driving there because of the problems in getting to the bus, and therefore they saw that as a model that might work. Unfortunately, there were a number of things. First of all, they didn't publicise it, so in fact residents didn't know what was going on. Secondly, it was designed only for outward bound buses going in the direction of UWE, which actually meant the large chunks of the ward it didn't serve any purpose at all, because it was taking people to where they didn't want to get to and not to where they did want to get to. So I only mention that in the context that if at some stage one was wanting to look at a project that could actually work and be viable, there are lots of lessons to be learnt from what went wrong, but it's not a reason to not pursue it, because the model actually could make a massive difference to those who use their cars when they don't need to. Just share that for the record.
Thank you, Jeff. Anything else on this? Okay, thank you. I think we just got the election officer.
Got a hand up.
Oh, sorry, Brian.
I was really just going to apologise, to say that I've got to go at 12:30 for another appointment. So to apologise in advance.
Thank you very much. Ian, the report on the election officer is just to note. Is that right? Do we have to do anything else?
That's right, Chair. It's really just a report on the process that's going to happen and to confirm the appointment of the returning officer. So,
Shazia,
it's more for your information.
Shazia, your question. So so there's no doubt about the elections going ahead in May then for.
Well, that's the current proposal, but clearly, if you want to make a suggestion, as was debated earlier, that's for you. But that's the planned proposal at the moment.
So the elections will now, in Bristol, certainly, there will be a lot of elections. There'll be,
absolutely. Yes, I think you have the lion's share, I'm afraid. So you've got your locals, you've got the Bristol mayoral election, you've got the Weka mayoral election, and you've got the Police and Crime Commissioner. So just as we did in 2016, it's a lot of elections.
Okay, Hugh?
Yeah, just to bring in the former debate, not rehashing the entire thing, but might it be possible for Scrutiny to note that the possibility that elections might have to be extended if there's no other?
I think what we agreed was that we wouldn't put that in the written report, but we would. I might mention that amongst other options in my oral summary, if that's okay.
I mean, the press have all heard what we've said anyway, so if anyone wanted to write up members consider delaying elections, they have the material. But there we are.
And I do remind people that if they want to put in a statement to the WECA meeting, they're able to do so before noon on Thursday. So, yeah. Okay, Ian, is there anything else I need to cover? Oh, sorry, Brenda, go ahead.
I think Councillor Pollock has a hand up.
Okay, just a quick question to Shazi, and she may not know the answer at the moment. Is it likely that, providing all those elections go ahead, that it will be a separate day count for each of them, as we have done in previous years?
Absolutely. We literally just had the discussion earlier last week as to timing of the dates. So the usual process is that the widest geographical area is counted first. So that would be the Police and Crime Commissioner. The second one would be the Weka Mayor. Third one would be the Bristol Mayor, and then the local elections. So what we need to do, because of COVID especially, we need to be mindful of cleanliness and hygiene. So we have to take into account the extra rigour in terms of cleaning each of the venues, as well as making sure we have enough counters and they're properly segregated. All of those issues are taken into account. But as soon as we know which days we're doing what, then obviously we will communicate that.
So we can guarantee that the 4 local election candidates will be on the last day when everybody's lost interest and is so tired they're not at all bothered. Yeah. Okay, something to look forward to. Not.
I've got Jeff, then Hal.
Yeah, Steve, all I wanted to say is we need to be careful. This item is purely about the returning officer. This isn't the item to mention the issue of deferring elections. That is on the issue to do with WECA. So I think you should keep it separate. Otherwise, it will cause confusion and it will weaken the argument.
No, it was that was always my intention. I think it was Hugh having another go to make sure that I got it in somewhere, and it's certainly my intention to get it in somewhere.
Shazi, I did mention that it could be brought up in this piece, but yeah.
Okay.
Fair enough.
Hal?
I did.
Mine wasn't really to do with this. It was more a question of what do we do with these statements that are made at the start of the meeting, because David Redgwell has raised a couple of good points about bus services that are not running. I'm not clear. Is that for me to go back to Baines or to First, or is
well, the statements are noted as formal documents. I think David will probably be putting that same statement into the WECA meeting on Friday. There isn't a process other than that. I mean, I made the point about consultation, so something's going to happen about that. I think it's up to us to make specific points and to carry them forward, Hal.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions? Ian, is there anything else I need? Oh, yes, Gary. Can't hear you, Gary. Sorry.
Hello?
Yeah, can hear you now, yeah.
Yeah, right. As a general principle, if we get good points fed into us as a scrutiny commission that we agree with and think are relevant, then should we not add our weight onto those points when we pass them on to the executive?
Yes, I think that's a good idea. I guess as individual statements are made, we can comment, rather as we have done today, we can comment on those, and we can forward our comments, excuse me, to the executive. Yeah, I think it's a good idea. Okay. Anything else? Ian, is there anything else I need to say? Excuse me.
No, Chair. As usual, I'll draft a summary of your comments and circulate it to you in the first instance, and then we'll circulate it to the committee. I think we're attaching 3 appendices.
Yeah.
First of all, the letter that you wrote to the mayors and leaders. Secondly, the note from Councillor James from the Skills Group. I think Councillor Trelford is going to send me a short note on the transport subgroup. So those form 3 appendices to the note, but we'll circulate that to all members for comment in the usual way.
Yeah, Hal?
So just continuing, I suppose I'm asking Gary, what should if I want to pick up some things that David said, what do you recommend I do?
Can't hear you, Gary. Still can't hear you, sorry.
I'm suggesting, it's a little late for this meeting here, but I was suggesting that we listen very carefully to all the submissions we actually get from informed parties and decide as a team, as a scrutiny commission, to put comments in. In the meantime, obviously, we can individually add comments in, and that's, I'm sure, is very relevant. But if we agreed to do things as a team, they would carry more weight.
You happy with that, Hal?
Yeah, that's quite a big job for us, I guess, isn't it? On that,
I suppose the problem with it is, David Redwell made, I don't know, a dozen recommendations in his statement. It's quite a big job to unravel that. We can do it certainly, and I would encourage individual members of this committee to do that. But as Gary said, I think it's a bit late for this meeting.
Yeah.
Okay, I propose to close the meeting now. Thank you all very much, and keep well. Thank you. Bye.